I'll just give you a bit of context to this, first of all. As you know, I've been leading on the community engagement for Duns, which, as one of the major towns in Berkshire, has a very diverse population. And I've also been working with a smaller community near Duns. And I wanted to share something about both experiences with you, because the whole experience for each has been quite different. And community engagement for me, now, can I move the slides or no, probably not. Could you go to the next slide, please? Because I've been involved as a consultant for many years and a project manager, I felt it was hugely important to actually plan the programme. And for me, that meant looking at the tools that were available. And of course, the Place Standard tool, for me, meets many of the requirements, but it has to be tailored. For many of the groups, they simply would not take the time to use the whole of the Place Standard tool. So when I'm planning the group that I'm going to be working with, then I'm looking at the Place Standard tool and saying, what kind of priorities are they likely to have? And I might tailor it and actually tailor the format that I'm using as well. For me, it was really important to understand the demographics of Duns and to look at the key groups and organisations, because if we're going to be totally representative of our community, we need to be sure that we're listening to all sections of the community. Now, in parallel with the community-led planning process, because I'm also involved with the Heart for Duns, we are just about to engage on a large consultation programme, because we're going to be redeveloping the hall to make it fit for purpose. And as part of that, we have to ask the audience, if you like. So we're going to be running almost 2 sets of engagement, one focused entirely on the hall, which will be a major project for Duns, but also to create the place plan. So it was really important to map the key groups and organisations and the stakeholders. And having done that, tailor the technique for each group. Now, up to now, we've probably had something like 250 to 300 responses to the engagement process that we've been working on. But we realise that we've still got a long way to go before we're in a position to actually start to draft a plan. There are sections of the community that we simply haven't been able to get to yet, that have been hard to reach. And we're in the process of looking at ways in which we can make that easier and how we can reach those groups. So next slide, please. When you start to look at the various tools for engagement, there are so many ways of doing it. A lot of people have gone straight for surveys and for online questionnaires, but there's a whole range of opportunities. One of the key things that we've found is it's important to go to where people are already, and you get a much better response than inviting people to open meetings. For example, we used the World Cafe approach with the Business Forum in Duns, and that was hugely successful because we just asked a few questions like, what are some of the barriers to trading in Duns? One of the big things that came up around that was the lack of further education in the area. And so that has led us to conversations with Borders College, with various other groups, to see what we can do about that. And that's something about the quick wins that Johnny was talking about as well. One of the really interesting experiences I had recently was when I attended an event in Coldstream, where there were lots of young people from the school invited to it. And they had maps of the area, and we heard someone come up with this idea about the the parking in Coldstream, which has been a problem since forever. And one young man simply went, well, there's a car park, and on the map, there's a field behind it that isn't used. So why can't you just, extend the car park? And it looked so obvious and so simple. It's not, in execution, it's not. But that mapping event allowed people to look at areas of the town to see, well, if we did this, would that work? And come up with ideas and be quite inventive on it. We've had some special interest groups as well, where particularly with groups like Greener Duns, where they are primarily interested in the environmental issues surrounding Duns. And so by working closely with them, we've been able to tailor parts of the Place Standard tool and ask the right questions. So that's been a really positive one. We're looking now at social media and at other kinds of ideas. We've had some art competitions and things, and all of those have been really successful by using different approaches for the different groups. And I'm sure most of you who are attending tonight will have had experiences of the right things for the right people and what kind of successes you've had. And as this is really about a peer support group, I would love to hear from you what successes you've had and what kind of approaches have been most successful for you, because we're all on a learning curve here. And no matter how many times you do this, there's always something new to learn. Next slide, please. I spoke about creating this matrix, and this for us was really, really important because the town team itself, we are all busy as everybody is, and it's impossible for us to get to everybody. So what we're looking for is to identify champions within those groups who will actually take on the engagement and come back to us. And so that our role as a town team is to coordinate, to identify, to look for quick wins, but also to identify projects and eventually to be able to create the plan. For each of those champions, though, we need to make sure that they are doing it consistently, that they're gathering the data that can be analysed, and so there is an element of training that we would need to give to those people, making sure that they've got the right tools and to understand that facilitation of these groups is important, because I'm sure all of you have found that there are people within your communities with very strong opinions and with pet projects, and the louder they talk, the more chance they think they've got of getting that project through. Now, if we're going to be really realistic about it, we need to make sure that we listen to that, but it doesn't take priority simply because people have the loudest voice. And so the facilitation element of it, of being able to encourage people to talk, but not allow people to dominate, is a skill that's really important during this process as well. Next slide, please. And absolutely certain there is no best way. There is no single best way to engage with the community. But as I said, you must be able to analyse the results. And so that consistency is absolutely appropriate. For me, again, the Place Standard tool in its various formats works very well. But in every case, I would be making sure that I'm using the right sections of it, tailoring the questions in such a way that I get the conversation going, but not necessarily always using the same language. But it's very important that you're able to know which group you're dealing with, how many people are in it, the kind of age range, and be able to add that to your evidence as you create the plan. You will all know how many people live within your community and therefore the numbers of responses that you need to be able to validate such a plan. I know in Duns we're about 3,500 people, and so we need to be sure that a plan that we create has enough responses and a breadth of responses to make sure that it's valid. The experience of dealing with a smaller community of about 300 people just outside Duns has been incredibly interesting, because we were able to go to every household and give them an initial questionnaire. Again, there was a process that was well planned, and it started off with saying, here's some of the things, here are some themes that people have come to us with. For example, we need a community hall, we don't have one. What are your ideas? If there was a community hall, what would you want from it? And so that gave us a starting point to be able to say, well, there is some demand for it, and these are the kind of priorities that people would like to see. The next stage of that was to say, well, what kind of hall would you want? Would you want a new build, or would you want something that exists within the community already? And what happened was that there were almost two factions that appeared. One that was very clear on a new build, and one that was very clear that they wanted to do something with a building that was already there. Part of the big job was to bring those groups together and to say, we're never going to get anything done if we've got two different approaches. How can we actually consolidate this? And what are the real key important issues that we want to address? And so having done that, we then invited the audience into the building, had an open day, and we were particularly keen to engage with young families, because there were, and there are, lots of people involved in this process who have memories of what communities used to be like, and are not necessarily looking forward to what a community needs to look like 5, 10, 20 years from now, what kind of facilities are required. And so by saying, this is what it used to look like, what should it look like for the future, we were able to get some really clear ideas about what the next generation was looking for, what families were looking for, and what would really bring back a heart to a community. So that was hugely important to be able to do that. Having had that open day and engaged with the community, had questionnaires which they filled in, we then analysed that and invited people back to a final meeting that said, these are the key projects, vote on them, what are your priorities? And we were able to identify what the community actually felt was important now, in 3 years' time, in 5 years' time, and in the longer term. And part of that was a plan for affordable housing. So we've been able to engage with South of Scotland Community Housing, who will do an audit and a survey of some of the local areas, some of the villages, and be able to come back with some recommendations on funding and on planning for that. So these are just different experiences that we've had of this community-led planning approach. And as I say, Duns and a smaller community, quite different in the approaches, but equally finding a kind of timeline for things to happen. Next slide, please. The community is made up of all sorts of groups and individuals. We looked at the number of clubs that were around Duns, and one of them that I attended last night was Duns History Society. And it became clear that they have a real issue because they have a massive archive. The place in which they store the archive is inappropriate, difficult to actually work in, and they are desperately looking for a new venue for that. So by bringing them into the community-led planning process, what I'm hearing is that Duns needs a museum. So that's a whole new area to discuss and to look at opportunities for that. Meanwhile, we're looking at a quick win, which will allow them to have a space somewhere with an exhibition and with facilities that are appropriate. So we've got both a quick win, but a long-term aim as well that will go into the community plan, into our place plan. We have engaged with both primary and secondary schools, and one of the issues that we've had really is there's always been in Duns. I mean, I grew up in Duns and never for a minute thought I'd be back to live in the place, but came back many years later. And I've heard for generations now, there's nothing for young folk to do in Duns. And so with that challenge, what we've been looking at is how do we actually get young people to tell us exactly what they want. I've had one attempt to work with the secondary school, with Berwickshire High School, and that failed miserably. So I had obviously got my planning wrong in that. But this time around, we're looking at a very different approach, and that is to bring in somebody to actually do an art project with them. And so rather than me going along with the Play Standard tool and going through questions, we'll be looking at just simply giving them some themes and some opportunities to draw, to paint, to act, to do whatever, and to take a creative approach to it. The Senior Citizens was hugely successful because there was an event called Silver Sunday, which was a celebration of senior citizens that filled the volunteer hall. So I was able to go around each of the tables, have a questionnaire, have them work together to discuss what they would like to see, and we got great responses from that. And so one of the themes that came out of that was the need for a proper nursing home, care home facility. So again, there's a theme that's emerging that's a longer term plan, but we will need to engage with other authorities and things to be able to satisfy that need in the town. So I guess what I'm trying to illustrate is that for each section of the community, we've had to think, what's the best way? How are we going to get to them? And what kind of priorities are likely to come out, rather than just taking a standard approach to it. Next slide, please. So there's the Play Standard tool. And as you will be well aware, there are all of these different sections, and while it would be lovely to think that all of the groups that we work with would be happy to work around all of that and give us feedback on all of those areas, my experience is that they won't, and that they will be drawn to some of those areas and will be more than happy to discuss that. But by looking at the community as a whole, we can still be able to get the full picture and be able to really get deep into what the needs and demands are for the community and get that standard and consistent approach. Next slide, please. So as I say, if we were looking to plan for the future, and I would love to hear from any of you who've been successful in doing this, engaging with a group of 16-year-olds, what themes do you think would be most relevant? where would be the best place to meet with them, what kind of time, and what format would be best. So if any of you have successfully done anything like this, I would love to hear from you, or have ideas on what the best approach might be. We're now into interactive mode. Anybody with any thoughts on it? Wendy?
And there is the Berwickshire Youth Workers. Have you
Yes,
engaged with them and seen if they could, because if anybody knows how to engage with young people of that age, it's the youth workers, I would have thought.
Connect Youth, they've got they're in Eyemouth, Coldstream and Duns. When I last spoke to them, Wendy, there were 6 people attending the youth club in Duns.
I don't necessarily mean about attending the youth club,
No,
but I wonder whether they would have ideas about how you could bring people together of that age and use their experience of reaching out. Because I know they're struggling in Duns because they haven't really got the resources to run the club in Duns. But as a group of people that are used to working with youngsters of that age, they probably will have a different perspective on how to engage with them and what might bring people together in a way that you'd be able to meet with them and access their ideas.
That's a great idea. I can get back to them and see if we can do something. The other group that I use sometimes is Allen Bank Arts, because they've done a lot of youth projects and things, and so that's another group that tend to be very successful in doing this.
Many years ago, we did a photography project, well, not project, but consultation thing, but in Ayton. Yeah. But it was with a younger age group, and we gave them, it was in the age of these, throwaway cameras, and it was with the primary school, and we gave them cameras and asked them to go out and photograph things around the village that they liked or didn't like, or just what they thought. And they brought them all together, explained what it was, and then we worked with them to create an exhibition, which they fed back to the wider community and said, these are the things that we found or ideas that we've had, and some solutions where they felt there were problems, and what would they like to see happen. And that seemed to work really well. But that was with a younger age group, not the 16-year-olds. Right,
because I mean, the 14 to 16-year-olds are notoriously difficult to engage with, and that is a real challenge. But I mean, I think, as you say, with the youth workers, with Allen Bank Arts, and doing something creatively with them is the best approach, rather than just asking them to fill in forms, because that, I know, doesn't work. Next slide, please. This has been one of the really most positive things that we've seen in engagement, is instead of starting with a blank sheet of paper, is saying, what are the 3 best things about living here? So that you're starting with the positive and then saying, so these are the really good things. What are the 3 things you would improve? And we've found that by starting like this, we're actually getting into a really good conversation with people. And it's at that point that we can actually introduce some of the questions and discussions coming from the group, because we're able to direct the conversation around the 3 things that they would improve. And that we found as a really successful way of doing it. Next slide, please. Just as Beth mentioned, there is help available from Borders Community Action, with a budget for an external facilitator if you feel you need it. And it is about building confidence and capacity within the team, with customised training and with support. I mean, we are so fortunate that we have been able to secure funding for this. It was a long and arduous process, I have to say, to be able to say, this is how we want to do it, and these are the kind of resources that we need. we're now looking at some administration support in Duns and some support for social media development as well. And it's absolutely fundamental, because I know from all of the people that I've spoken to that are involved in this process, everybody is beginning to feel, gosh, is this really what I signed up for? This is longer and harder than I ever thought it was going to be. And we need all the help we can get. And thankfully, Beth is on hand, Jess is on hand, and there are resources out there to be able to help us with it. We've decided that we're not in a position to be funding a consultant, but it may be that at the stage where we are ready to start drafting the plan, that might be a time to bring in a graphic designer and maybe commission somebody that is used to writing a place plan, or that could help us in that way. But at the moment, certainly in Duns, we feel very much that we've got resources within our team and within the community that we can actually progress things at the moment. I don't know how other people feel about that. I mean, I know that some are engaging consultants and support in the early stages, but we're trying to get people like Johnny to help us in Duns, and Johnny's experience of working internationally on this kind of thing is invaluable. And by bringing people into the town team with those skills, we feel that we're actually really making progress with it. So I'm very happy to take any questions. I know that's been a whistle-stop tour, but I'm conscious of time.
Yeah, thanks so much, Anne.